Hi, my name's Alistair and I'm a mediumistic life coach, which means I'm a life coach and a tarot reader of over 20 years experience, and I put the two together. So it's mediumistic life coaching. I'm also a Reiki master and a carer as well. This evening's chat, we're going to talk about men and emotions. Now, throughout this, I'm going to be talking quite candidly about my own emotions. I've just seen an orb come down the camera there. That was quite cool. I'm going to talk about my own emotions and my own journey with them. And I'm going to be explaining things from my personal point of view. So, although this is it's a life coachy kind of session, it's coffee and coaching, this is more of a kind of explaining my journey a little bit. And if you find similarities in how you manage your emotions or how it makes you feel, then excellent. There's a potential you're not the only person that's feeling it. The topic this week as well was men and emotions, because I'm fairly certain ladies have their emotions pretty much sorted, whereas men don't. And for the past week, for this event, I've paid to advertise on Facebook. The only interaction that men had with any of the adverts were laughing faces or hostility. I got called a crook. At no point did any of the men, "Hi, Marion's just arrived. Hi, Marion, you only missed the intro. Don't worry." So I paid for the privilege to advertise on Facebook while they obviously targeted people that weren't interested in what I was doing, or found it quite amusing. I don't know, maybe there was some irony there. I just thought it was quite ironic that this was a talk about men and emotions and the way that men interacted with the advert in the first place before I've even said anything. But on top of that, I want to say thank you as well to everybody. There's been over 80 views on last week's coffee and coaching, so that's good. I'm chuffed to bits with that. Like I said last week, I'm going to try and slow down a little bit. I think I talk a bit too quick. So if you are watching live and you want to say hi or say what your week's been like, or if there's a particular aspect of this that you're not sure about or you've got a question, just put it in the comments, it's fine. If you're not watching this live and you're watching it recorded, again, the same thing, you can private message me. I've got no issue with that at all. This video is completely free. Right, let's kind of get into it. Let's get into the topic. So men and emotions. What are emotions? Simple Google definition is an emotion is separate from reason or logic. Which is why when we're acting emotionally, we don't always act with great reason or great logic, okay? Because we're being driven by an emotion. Now, I find sometimes the category of emotions quite difficult to process. So what somebody would portray perhaps by saying, well, you look angry, so the emotion was anger. No, the emotion was hurt, but I displayed anger. I've got dust blowing around. That's not an orb. That's just dust. So sometimes I get a little bit hung up on what other people's interpretation of what my emotions have been through different times and events and stuff. So we handle emotions, one, internally, two, externally. As I said, I'm not going into great depths into textbook terminology for things because there's so many different avenues that people can choose when it comes to mental health that I kind of just want to touch on the textbooky bits, and then I'm going to kind of cover it in my journey and sort of how we got there at the end. So please stay tuned. Right. So handling our emotions internally as opposed to externally. So internally, I have no issue with that at all. A lot of the times I will sit quiet and process whatever it is I'm thinking or feeling, which it would be. And it's about breaking that emotion down into why am I feeling it? What's caused it? What's the calmest resolve to it? Or what's the quickest escape from it? Kind of pigeonholing sort of different parts of emotion. What about sort of externally then? So if we're going to display our emotions externally, we're talking to somebody, we've perhaps broken down, we're arguing with somebody. So either way, we're expressing the emotion, we're arguing. Although it would depend on what emotion was driving the argument, admittedly. So we kind of lead to my personal journey. Like I said last week, I moved to Scotland when I was 9, so I was moved away from most of my family and my dad. And on reflection of sort of reviewing this for the sake of this video, it became more and more aware of, I was kind of processing and thinking about what my mum's emotions must have been at the time, and what my dad's emotions must have been at the time. And I can only speculate, I don't know. So they made decisions for whatever reasons, and they were the right ones at the right time. The other thing is, when I talk about sort of my move to Scotland, although there is some negative aspects, on the whole, the thing was cool. It was nice being up there. So my journey starts 525 miles away, and now I'm living in a house with my maternal mum and my grandma and my sister. So there's no male role model now at all. And there hasn't been since I was 6. But apart from sort of coming around at weekends, picking me up and taking us out and stuff, doing stuff as kids, as separated dads do. But I've got none of that now. He's 525 miles away, exactly. I knew it, door to door, 525 miles. So there's no male role model. There's nobody for me to see as a male in the household at all now. And I'm going to tell you what parts get missed in this equation. I didn't see my dad fix anything, or a male role model fix anything. So find something that was broken, see the problem, solve the problem, done. I didn't see my dad handle any anxiety. To be fair, my dad doesn't think he gets anxiety. Having known him now in later life, I never saw my dad communicate with women or my mum, or have an argument with my mum and then resolve the argument, or have an argument with somebody in a shop and then resolve the argument. I never seen any male characteristics to copy as a child. And it's quite tricky to talk about this, because I don't want this to sound like I'm having a go at either of my parents, because I'm not. What I'm doing is cathartically getting this out of my head and hoping that somebody else can relate to it and go, holy crap, I wasn't the only one. So, God, it's warm in here. So that male role model isn't there, but it kind of, you get surrogate sections of it. So my best mate's dad, very intelligent, university lecturer, used to be a thespian actor, and he was in films, he'd done a few films. So I kind of, because I was friends with his son, he was my best mate, I was round their house quite a lot. So I'd seen his dad, how he spoke. So a lot of my creative language comes from those conversations with him. How I'm polite comes from him, because that's the kind of house he had. So he went round to my mate's house, that's how you behaved in the house. So those kind of role models, I was like, so that's how that family operates. You go home, that's not quite the same, but you get my point. The other thing is, I touched on it earlier, having an argument. It's very difficult, and I find this extremely difficult, to remember that even though I'm having an argument, and me and Penny will not argue as such, but we'll perhaps disagree on a topic, and then we'll debate it passionately. Underpinning the whole debate is love. There's no personal aspect to it. But that is the first time in my life I've had that. Every other argument, and this came up because I was talking about men and processing emotions, came up where in my previous relationships, not been able to process an emotion, so I need time to deconstruct it. I need to be sat quiet on my own, just left peacefully to process what's going through in my head. At that point, said lady steps in to find out what's going on. Nothing's going on. I'm a bit stressed. I need to, well, what's happened? I don't want to deconstruct this with you. I need to just go and chill out. Well, if you leave, don't come back. Now I'm stuck in a position where I can't deconstruct what's stressing me out to get out of me because I didn't want to involve anybody. And you get the lead up to that is, well, why are you talking to me angrily? Well, because I was angry at what I was dealing with, and now you've taken my attention away to you. Now I'm trying to explain it to you, but I've kept the same emotion as earlier. Do you see how this goes? So then you're now in an argument because the female wants to solve the problem for you to some extent, but they're also looking for threat. And now you're angry, so you're a threat potentially. So you now get stuck in a catch-22 where you can't leave because that jeopardizes your whole relationship and you can't come back, but you can't stay and continue the conversation and continue in the same emotion because it's not healthy. And that is where, as a man, I've been stuck. And I've literally thrown my hands up in the air and just sat on the floor. And I don't know where to go from this point. You won't allow me to deconstruct my own emotions. You won't allow me to come through the other end of it without you being involved in some way. And that's where I kind of want to touch on, because men haven't really engaged with this. It's kind of to the partners of the men. I'm not going to say women because it's not the 1940s. Whoever's with a man that's processing emotions, they call me an emotional man. I consider myself an emotional man, and I'll tell you for why. Because I love strongly, and I'm angry when I want to be. I can process both ends of the spectrum and be passionately to get something done, or I can be passionately romantic and do whatever needs to be done to make my lady feel good. I made sure she concurred then. So, right, I'm going to skip back, but I'm going to have a little bit of a breather, just have some coffee. I get off on tangents, and then I struggle to remember where I was. I bet I've literally been live for like 10 minutes. 12 minutes, that's a lot of stuff to cover in 12 minutes. So to kind of recap this to the bullet point important bits. During my life, at 9 years old, to be taken and moved away so that there's less of a male role model. Now, let's say, for instance, we go, do I want to go off on a little tangent? Let's say my mum had met somebody else and there'd have been another bloke there then. Hey, Dad, Leah's just arrived. Would that have been better? I don't know. Would it have been worse? I don't know. It's Schrodinger's, whatever his name is, cat. I've got no idea. Because it didn't happen, so I had no control over that aspect of things. So, having that lack of a male role model during those times, like I said earlier, the bullet points, I didn't see my dad fix anything, repair anything, mend something, accidentally electrocute himself. Do you know what I mean? Anything like that. Handling anxiety, stressful situation, hard day at work, comes in having a bit of a grump. I don't know. I've never witnessed it. So I have no idea how that works for anybody else. How he interacts with women in shops, men in shops, how he interacts with society. Because to me, my dad was the strongest man I knew. He always beat me at a bloody arm wrestle, so he was the strongest bloke I knew. So I then didn't have the mirror there to figure it out. And I didn't witness him overcoming an argument. I've heard the stories, my dad's told me about different stories and stuff, but to not witness it and kind of see how somebody goes full circle to handle an argumentative situation. So they're just some of the key points that I've put in, and they're all personal ones. I'm not saying that's anything to anybody else. So what male interactions did I get? I had positive ones with my best mates' parents sometimes. Sometimes they weren't. Some dads seemed to be like knobheads, so that didn't quite work out. I didn't respect them enough to look up to them for any reason. But I, as a child, was always looking for that masculine role model. I know I was. So the male interactions that I had were challenging. There were a challenge at school. We're the same age, the peer group. Every male interaction was a challenge in some way. It was confrontational. 50% of the time, every boy I ever spoke to growing up was a confrontation or an argument about something, nothing, anything, whatever it was. And it was always aggressive. Always. I don't remember men, other than my mates, obviously. Every other interaction throughout school was always, you got to watch your back. You had to watch your back from getting to school to the bus, from getting from the bus back to your house, because it's what it was like. It was as simple as that. Every male that it was there was a challenge for some reason. And that could have been a challenge driven by the fact that I've always been quite stocky. It could have been a challenge driven by the fact I was English in a Scottish school during the 80s. It could be that I used to smoke and people didn't like that. It could be that, I don't know. I don't know what their motivations were for the dislike that they had. But it meant that most of my interactions with peers my age, male, was generally a challenging, confrontational, aggressive exchange in some way. So that doesn't provide any balance to the other bits that are missing now from where my dad wasn't there. See, other father figure, male role model. So all of those things that I've kind of had to figure out through school and reading books and studying sociology and taking a beating and figuring out what went wrong and how to avoid it the next time, it's resilience to stuff that makes you stronger. Now, how does that relate to emotions? Simple. Every time a male shouts or gets aggressive, and I'm in the presence of a man that seems angry, my adrenaline runs immediately because I've spotted the threat, because I was so used to it growing up. That threat then has two options. One, can I get away from the situation without having to cause any fuss, or have I got to go through the situation to get out the other side? And that's the only two processes that will happen while you're emotionally charged like that. Because I'm figuring out fight or flight. I like the others. There's fight, flight, flee, freeze, flop. Those are the other two favourites. But fight or flight is effectively what's being triggered. And that's an emotion. Fear is an emotion. So I'm going to try and bring this back to generalised kind of men and managing emotions. Because every situation where we've felt threatened or frightened, we've needed to use aggression to get out of it, that logs, it sticks, and adrenaline is so addictive. People adrenaline junkies, people jump out of planes to get it, for God's sake. So if you get yourself in a stressful situation and that hormone is running with those emotions attached to it, you're kind of getting a bit of a high out of it, but an uncontrollable one at the same time. I'm kind of trying to pick holes a little bit, and I'm doing that on purpose because we need to be able to sit at some point and debrief our own emotions. So we've got to kind of pick holes as we go through. So what did I learn? Through the kind of role models that I had, what I learned was my own time, my own space. So one or two good close friends, it's all anybody needs in life. A couple of good close friends, that's it. And they don't have to be the same friends throughout your entire life. They just need to be good friends at the right time and the right place. Because of that, not because of that, I don't know where I was leading with that. So yeah, so what did I kind of learn from this? One, I had to look further afield to figure it out. I had to read a book. So I left school and studied sociology. That was my driving force to getting into psychology. Was I wanted to try and figure out, what was it I did? What was it? Why did people react to me like that, but not to everybody else? So I needed to understand sociology, and I didn't take it to any degree levels, massive, but enough that I understood it. And then I went off down the counselling and autism routes, and life coaching, and we're kind of really skipping ahead now. But that was quite a while ago when I studied that, so it was kind of, I just left school. So we've got a few people watching now. So I'm going to take a bit of a breather and have a coffee. So what do you guys think? Does what I've said make sense? Do you understand it? Obviously, like I said, predominantly this video is going to be watched by ladies. So it's potentially up to you guys to manage the man to an extent, or point them in the direction of this video. Waiting for people to type. Nobody's typing. Right. I don't want to leave a flat spot in my video, but if you guys have any comments, please, by all means, do put them on there. And like I said earlier, if you have any questions and you think having a chat with me will help, then yeah, give me a call, drop me a message. What did I miss? So the bits we're kind of touching on there were, what did I miss? What did I learn? And then the effects in later life. The effects in later life would take ages to go through. Genuinely would take ages. If I boil it down to, eventually what I tried to do was be a bit like a chameleon and be whatever I needed to be for the person that I wanted to be with, so that they would keep me there, if you get my logic. So it was about losing my own identity, because that person that I was kept being persecuted, kept being having a go at, kept being argued at, kept being picked on. So I needed to change that person. And it literally developed by developing a pretty good Scottish accent, so I could blend in with an accent, and 2, I went off on my own. And it was as simple as that. It's like my own time, my own space. The effects come with later on. My brain keeps flicking backwards and forwards and I keep losing my thread. To boil it down for the last, I don't know, let's say the last 15 years. I'd say previous 15 years bar from about a couple of years ago, not one person that I was with connected and understood who I was and what I was, because I was the chameleon. I just literally needed to be whatever I needed to be. So as a question that's come up quite a lot that I'd like to kind of cover, when I got married the first time, my first wife was Lavender, the same as me. Then, because we were going into a sport where the name had an element of prestige to it, we agreed to change the name to Bray. So that, after I was married, so I went from Lavender to Bray. Then we split up, and I'm still Bray, or was still Bray, am still Bray, because my daughters are Bray. And as it stands at the moment, once I've got enough money, I will be changing my name back to Lavender, but legally it's still Bray. But no, I don't understand why people have this sort of weird sort of hang up as to what happened about it. There was nothing dodgy or fly about it. It was just some name changes. So yeah. So in that response, I have to take a little bit of responsibility. I'm going to go back slightly to being the chameleon. I have to take responsibility for the fact that if I'm in disguise, I'm hiding my emotions. So my emotions are not clear. They're not to the forefront. So in theory, neither of the two people I was with actually had to deal with any of my emotions, because they weren't there. They were buried. And at the age of 30, I popped and had 6 months off work. And then in 2010, my head popped and I had to go back on tablets, because that's how National Health Service works. We find the symptom and we just deal with that. We don't deal with the cause. We medicate, we numb, we give painkillers to stuff, and we just numb symptoms. We don't deal with the actual problem. So trying to get into the NHS system to get a counsellor or any sort of mental health, I'm sorry, you won't even get me past the first hour on the phone call just trying to get through to the person who doesn't give a monkeys, because they're too stressed out doing their job anyway. They're under too much pressure to deliver an empathetic response. So it's a no-no from me straight off. So what's the alternatives? I'm kind of going off on a bit of a tangent here. What about some of the charities that work with men? I've read the pamphlets they send out. They're written, I don't think, by men. Or they're written by football men. Because there's different aspects to masculine brains. and the different aspects to the masculinity stretch that there is nowadays. I'm not a football chanting blokey bloke, but everybody thinks I am. Even my barber will go, oh, you're quite a blokey bloke. No, I'm not. I don't think I am at all. I don't think I'm a particularly masculine person. I'm big and yeah, all right, and people go, oh, you look a bit like a Viking, but that's not my interpretation of me. I want to be a cuddly dad. I want to be my girl sitting. That's who I want to be. I want to be the person that my daughters were comfortable to run up to give a hug and to sit with and watch Simpsons. That's not, in my mind, and I'm not saying this is right, in my mind, that's not what would draw my kids in to sit with me. Sitting there looking like that wouldn't have done it. You need to soften off. Obviously, that's wrong. I'm sure there's loads of kids out there that love their bodybuilding days. They're fine. I'm not saying anything about that. It was just in my head as my form of body morphia or whatever you class it as, for the masculine side of my brain. That masculinity is not just a feeling, it's a look, apparently. So you have got to kind of work all of that through. That's where it gets a little bit tricky as well, because the effects in later life are, I hid the kind of mediumship, spiritual stuff more. For the last, well, probably up until being with Penny, didn't really do much at all. Not that the people I was with were non-believers, but it wasn't part of the lifestyle. So I only ever read cards for myself in private, and when I was estranged from my children, I used to pull cards and read their cards, because of my kids, and I wanted to know what was going on, and that was the only connection I had. So that's a whole other video, though. We'll talk about that in a different video. 2 seconds, let me just catch up. So yeah, so emotional. So I've always felt that emotions are categorized in 2 things, feminine and masculine. And like I said at the beginning, these are all how I've been through the journey. I'm not saying that this is correct, and I'm not offering a treatment for anything that I'm saying. What I'm saying is that as far as I was concerned, things like love, caring, empathy, passion, they're all feminine traits. Anger, aggressive, vindictive, nasty, they're all male traits. And that's the lifestyle I grew up with, because that was my interactions with people. So now, like I said, it's harder. You have to deconstruct the emotion and be aware of it. Some of this touches in with CBT, cognitive behavioural therapy, which I did do, where you isolate the trigger, you figure out what it is, and then you change it, and you sort of mould it and change it around. And that's fine. I think a lot of us do that anyway with just thoughts in our head, because, pardon me, like I said at the beginning, reliving this relives the emotions, because that's kind of a memory. It's an emotional memory. The memory's been locked in to my brain because of an emotional moment. That's how most memories are locked in, surely. Now, emotions drive us. So I don't want this to be as a negative as such. The emotions that I had when I decided to pick myself up off the street and go back to my mum's and then make my way to my dad's, that was driven by the emotion. And the emotion of, I've had enough of this shit. I need to do better. I can be better. And that was the driving force behind it. But an emotion, like I said right at the beginning, will bypass reason and logic. So it's those 2 moments. The moment that you feel the emotion, and in all honesty, it was Reiki training that was the nirvana moment with this for me, was the empathy for somebody else. The kind of understanding of just how angry I am at that moment, or annoyed or frustrated, whoever it is I'm talking to that I can't get anywhere with for whatever reason. I don't know. I'm trying to get through to a customer service place, whatever it is. That's the bit that winds me up the most. It's not technically their fault. So I have to kind of remain impartial to my own emotion. But doing that in real life, face to face with somebody, very difficult indeed, because you've already hit fight or flight. In the 100th of a second that it takes for the adrenaline to hit my system, I've already made the decision of fight or flight before I've even gone, who is this person? What have they done? How am I going to cope with this emotion and process it? Like I said, I hope you guys kind of get what I mean by this. Let me just double check my notes, hold on. Oh yeah, it is, yeah. We're talking about adrenaline. It takes 90 minutes for the average person to get the adrenaline back out of their system. So if you imagine you're in a situation, I don't know, for a day where you've got quite stressy, I don't know, let's say for instance you're a delivery driver and the next 3 houses you get to are all arguing about something, or there's an issue with something, or you're a customer service person, the next 3 customers that come to you, they've all got an issue that sets your adrenaline off. You've now got 3 loads of that and an hour and a half before it drops out. So you end up with that all the way through. And be quite frank, I think that was pretty much from the age of 12 to about the age of 17, that's pretty much how it was all the way through. So it's not until you get to a point where you can sit and deconstruct your own emotions and break them down and figure out where they came from. How valid are they? That's the main thing. Is it valid to be angry at this person that I'm talking to? Is it valid to be annoyed? And my biggest pet peeve, people driving cars and then getting aggressive when, I don't know, you've accidentally pulled out in front of them. The equivalent is somebody stepping out of a side alleyway onto a pavement and then you just punching them straight in the face because they've stepped out in front of you. It's a car. There's not that big a deal, surely. But to people it is. They get really aggressive, and it's a really impersonal moment. As a person who's been in fights and been out of fights and tried to avoid fights, it's a simple thing. Once somebody's in their car, they're protected and they're safe. It becomes personal when people get out of their cars, and that's when it gets a bit hairy at that point. But I've just never understood why people get so aggressive when they're driving. It doesn't fathom me in the slightest. I don't get it. But I also don't get it when people are basically belligerent and just pull out on you, because people do. But I kind of think that's just how people are in general. I think it's kind of just
selfish.
Yeah, when you're driving your car, you're trying to get from point A to point B. It doesn't matter if it's a car, a go-kart, or a horse and carriage. All through history, we've been trying to get from point A to point B, and we want to do it without being interrupted. But we're all on the same road, so we're all technically doing the same part of the same journey together, but side by side of a different car, or nose to tail in a different car. You're technically in the same space and time with somebody else you perhaps don't even know.
Bubble.
Yeah. It's just kind of, let shit go. Right. More to do with men and emotions. So, society tells us, how do we show love? I'll tell you how we show love. We go to some random app and we buy shitloads of roses and flowers and cards, and we get all romantic. And that didn't put kids under pressure, did it? That doesn't put men under pressure at all, because that's some idealistic idea from somebody else. Don't get me wrong, if your partner likes all that shit, then that's great. But it's not done like that when you're a kid. At school, you're at Valentine's Day. Cards have to go around, do they? I just don't. Yeah, there's a separate topic to perhaps be debated, but there's all these. It's just a part of a social construct which tags to an emotion. So while I was at school, I got into trouble, or at least I was dragged into trouble. But because I would get myself out of trouble, I was the one with the anger issue. Not the person provoking, the child provoking me and me retaliating. I was the problem. So I had the anger issue. So the next plan then is to manage my anger. And I'm talking like I'm 12 years old. How do you tell a 12-year-old they're angry and they've got aggression problems? It's ridiculous. I've not got aggression problems at all. I needed a decent bike. I just needed to go for a run somewhere, get the stuff out of my system, get away from the people I was round. But no, you got to do this. So the idea from the school is, well, we'll put him in the taekwondo class that's at school. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. I went from being quite angry and knowing how to basically defend myself if I needed to being quite proficient. So it made things quite short, sweet, and I have no idea what their motivation was, but it wasn't what they got. Because it didn't stop any of the bullying, it didn't stop any of my anger issues, it just made me slightly more efficient at that time. But let's say, for instance, I had a dad at home, and I'd have gone home and spoke to him about it. What do you reckon he'd have said? I'll tell you what he said, because I phoned him. That was one of the days I was bullied. And when I tell you I was bullied, I got pushed 20 feet off of the edge of a small cliff behind Hopeman Primary School into gorse bushes. I rang my dad about that one because we went to the school, my mum told him and everything else, and it's all the kind of bits and bobs are done and all the meetings are put in place. And it was probably one of the best bits of advice my dad ever said, but it was aggressive. And it was to just punch him square in the face. Next time that lad does anything, don't even give him a second breath, just punch him square in the face. And to be fair, I did. And he had to have his front tooth sorted. And I got expelled from the school. So what did I accomplish? It's a great piece of advice. Yes, it stopped the problem, the bullying. It definitely stopped it because I was expelled from the school. So it technically wasn't the correct answer. It was a good piece of advice, and it stood me in fairly good stead, I suppose, for later. But that's not really how we should deal with things, or is it? And the reason I say that is because I've always had this kind of bit of logic that there's a reason why humans fight each other. There's a reason why we have boxing. There's a reason why we have martial arts, because we constantly want a competition with each other. We've got to strive to be the biggest, the strongest, the fastest, the best at something. It's just boring to be normal. And it's that, the reason I mention this is because of the emotion of disappointment. When you set a target or as an expectation made on you, like I mentioned earlier with Hallmark and Valentine's Day. It's the same when it comes for engagement rings. Even as a young bloke, I thought that was really one-sided. I was like, why have I got to buy the engagement ring? And as a person who's been married twice, fuck me, I've paid enough now. Why was it down to me to do it? But it was, because socially it was down to me to do it. Now, had I mixed in other groups maybe, that were different, broad-minded or things like that, or met a different person, then that perhaps would have been different. Yes, I can hear you saying that you bought our promise rings. I could hear it in my head as I said it, but previously. So yeah, but the pressure was put on me to do it. So the pressure is put on me to find the money to pay for it. Why? Because I'm the man, that's why, and that's what I've been told. I grew up being told that if you want to solve your problems, you've got to be He-Man, so you've got to be strong like He-Man, suave like James Bond, and have the sense of humour of the Crankies. What a generational time to grow up. It's insane. And all of that spits out somebody like me, who's in their mid-40s and is possibly just about getting to grips with the shit in his emotions. I've been off antidepressants now for 2 years, nearly 2 years, 18 months. About 18 months completely clear of antidepressants because they were only treating the symptoms. And if we're not treating the problem, then the symptom will remain. So why do you keep treating that? It doesn't make any sense. Or at least that doesn't to me, because that's my male brain. The part with me in psychology is I like to feel a beginning, a middle and an end to it. And that doesn't always happen with emotions. Sometimes there's a beginning and you get lost in the middle for a bit and you have to sit there and figure it out until you get to the end. And that is tricky. So how from my perspective, how do you get men to talk about emotions? You don't. Simply you don't. if they don't want to, and they don't want to talk about their emotions, I don't think it's fair to force anybody to talk about anything they're not comfortable with at all. Because everybody says, and I mean this from a personal point of view, that people say, oh, it's good to talk your problems out. A problem shared is a problem halved. No, it's not. It's not at all. A problem shared is just a problem shared. Somebody else knows about the shit you're still going through. It's not shared it because they've not taken any of it away from you. You've still got it. It's still yours. You still own it until you decide to let it go. And this is where sometimes talking it through doesn't. Yes, there is sort of cathartic element just to doing this video and getting all of this out there. Because I feel like I've kind of been in hiding for sort of 15 odd years. And none of this stuff was around when I was a kid. All this videoing yourself and putting yourself live, great, go for it. I'll explain to you what's going on in the head of a 43-year-old nutcase. Let's see what's happening. Again, sort of getting men to talk about their emotions. Most men don't have the vocabulary. Not because they don't want that, because they can't, just they're not interested, they're not engaged with it. The moment you mention anything about counselling or psychology, they will immediately jump to the last person they spoke to who was crap, didn't do anything. They just sat, told me to give this pamphlet. They gave me a 3 triple fold flyer and that was it. Great. That's most men's experience with it, because they won't engage from the start, because they're already got the fight flight emotion kicked in, because you're about to make them talk about stuff, so you're technically putting them under pressure. You're the threat. The counsellor is the threat. The psychologist is the threat. Your partner is the threat, because if you let them inside your head and shit comes out of there and you're not sure what you've said, they'll remember and they will throw it straight back at you. And that piece of frightening knowledge is what drives most men's emotions to stay quiet. Because if they say something out loud, it's now there for somebody else to use as ammunition against them. It's not masculine to cry. Well, it is. It's not masculine or feminine to cry. You're just crying. No matter if you're a man or a woman or a dog. If you're crying, you're crying. It's simple as that. There's different emotions behind crying, obviously. I think the emotions that men are trying to deal with are ones based on equality. And I'm going to touch on this subject very, very gently. But from my perspective, men and women are different. We are different psychologically, we are different physiologically. And it's trying to understand a group of people, even though they are individually affected by individual circumstances, but we still try and pigeonhole everybody into a set of boxes based on generalized psychological terms that we need to go down, because if we don't get those terms, we can't treat the symptoms. And this is where, like I said, a bit of life coaching is different to a counsellor, because the cards will come out with the aspects of your life that you need to address, not up to anybody else. Take responsibility for yourself, take responsibility for your own emotions. Don't pin them on somebody else and blame them on somebody else. If you're feeling them, they're yours. The fact that somebody started that, that's fine, but you still own the emotion. It's still your emotion, whatever it is they've given you. That's not, obviously that's not ideal if it's either end of the spectrum. If they're giving you the love emotion, then that's great. Reciprocate that. If they're giving you angry emotion, now you've potentially got to digest that. And you've got to just take it and deal with it, or argue back. That's entirely up to you. I worry at the minute about the generations to come, because as a mid-40s-year-old bloke, I've seen a lot of changes from growing up with Boy George and all the glam rock and all that stuff, through to the fashions and stuff of today, where I couldn't go into River Island and buy a pair of jeans because my calves were too big, because blokes have got little skinny legs nowadays. There's so much difference between people nowadays and blokes, how they were when I was a kid, and the responses. So I'm trying to relate as a 40-year-old bloke to 20-year-old blokes nowadays doing stuff, and that's difficult because they're a lot more emotional than I was ever allowed to be. They can do this. They can go to the doctor and say, well, I've got anxiety, I've got depression, I think it might be this. There's all the, you can Google stuff. You can start, I mean, I Googled, how should men process emotions? And there was just reams, pages and pages and pages of stuff. There's loads of stuff out there for blokes to do it, but you got to read, and that takes effort. Simple as that. Sorry, well, I've got off on a tangent then. Yeah, it takes effort. Right, I kind of wrap this up a little bit. What sort of time we have? Sort of 45 minutes. Like I said, this is quite a personal journey. It's quite daunting, really, when you think 80 odd people watched the last video. If the same people watched this video, that's 80 more people that know what it was like to grow up in a single parent family during the 80s and 90s with no father figure. I could give you loads of other crap to do with shit that single parents do that they try and hide, and it affects kids. But parents still bloody do it. Yeah, focus on what we're talking about. Reason being is because we're talking about emotions. So at key points in my life, I've had massive emotional changes. So I don't know, the trigger for that one, being completely honest with you, was Christmas 2010, receiving a letter from the solicitor saying I won't see my children at Christmas. So that's where the emotion jumped there when I was talking about that. So to recap, just slightly, emotions are separate from reason and logic. So when you feel the emotion, it's up to you to put reason and logic into it if you can, as quick as you can, and if you can't, just get out of the situation and take time. But it's the biggest thing I found was it was about self-awareness and this self-love, taking time to care for yourself. And I can't stress that enough, to be fair. When I say about meditation, I will meditate in the bath, I'll meditate in the garden, I'll meditate for 5 minutes when I'm having a fag and it's gone out. I just zone out and I'll stare at my fish pond or, I don't know, the sky, the clouds, anything. That to me is a form of meditation because I just take 5 or 10 minutes to deconstruct whatever it is that's bugging me in my head, whatever's going round and round in circles in my head. I just take 5 minutes to just focus on it, give it some time and some effort, figure out what it is, and then I can park it. I don't need to think about it anymore. Actual meditation where you kind of clear your mind and focus on your breathing is important, but sometimes it's more about just sitting and thinking. To me, I class that as a meditation because I'm allowing myself to process what's going on, and try and figure out what's the cause, what's the effect. Okay, and it is that the old tale, the butterfly's wings in China cause a hurricane in America, or whatever it's called. It is that one little thing can set off your adrenaline. Your adrenaline kicks in. You've now got an hour and a half before you can calm down. And that is a tricky thing. I think it's tricky for blokes to deal with, and it's sometimes tricky for their partners to watch and be able to just step back and go, do you know what? I mean, I'm sure there's loads of people out there that are married to blokes and they go, no, when he starts that, I just shut him in the garage or something, or just send him out. They leave him to it. I'm sure there's plenty of that where people have, between the two in the relationship, they've figured out how to get their, what's the word? Like crisis words. Kind of your communication with your partner where you sort of go, or a close friend where you sort of have that word or a way that they know that you need a message or a chat, if you get my logic. And that's not always available to everybody. So my advice would be, if you are struggling with mental health, call somebody, speak to somebody, anybody. It's not necessarily a case that the problem will be halved. No, the problem will still be there, but somebody else will be on the end of the phone or at the end of a message or in the room with you to talk about it, or just to do nothing and just sit there. What do they class it as? It's called an uncomfortable silence. And it's, to me, it's not. You kind of just zoning in. So it's not it's not an uncomfortable side. I think sometimes it is, perhaps feels a bit uncomfortable. Right, I've waffled for way too long. I think there's only a couple of people on there. so hopefully people have watched. Hopefully you guys will watch it back. And maybe it'll connect with somebody. I don't know. But yeah, that's my personal journey in figuring out how to be a bloke. Really, more than anything else. Have I missed anything? So yeah, if there's anybody there, go on, tap a little love heart on the screen, see if that works. I think Marion's there. But like I said, I'm going to wrap this up. Like I said on the post, this is about sort of men and their emotions, but to be honest, it tends to be about men's partners and managing their man's emotions. And there's nothing wrong with that to an extent, but it will get wearing if you're constantly the rock and you're not allowed to be the limpet sometimes. Marion sharing the love. Thank you, Marion. So yeah, I hope you've enjoyed this personal journey. If you've got any comments, please feel free to keep them to yourself. Because it was my life. I chose to do things my way and how I did them. And yeah, a lot of it was wrong, a lot of it was right. It's as simple as that.
You didn't have a life coach.
But no, and I didn't have a life coach at the time either. So I had all this nonsense beat into me. So thank you for that. Love to you all. And I'll see you on the next